It will take a quick look at different types of research in psychology, and specifically two groups of research. The first we'll talk about is descriptive or correlational research, and the second will be experimental. This video will just cover descriptive research. Okay, so you'll see this in the interactive notebook. You'll also see this in the student guided notes. Make sure you have this table completed and you understand the 4 different research methods that are listed here. You can describe, list advantages and disadvantages of each. So here we got the 3 types we just said a second ago. An easy way to remember this, and we'll talk about this all year as we look at research, is descriptive research is hands-off, which means all I'm doing as a researcher, whether I'm working in a university or like you are going to do some research this year, or if I'm working for a private company or whatever I'm doing, hands-off is descriptive research, which means I'm not going to manipulate my subjects. I'm not going to manipulate their environment. My hands are off. All I'm doing is observing, asking, collecting data about what people are already doing, not manipulating them. So descriptive research, hands off. All we're doing is describing. So you'll see, why do we need descriptive research in psychology? It's actually really, really important and makes up quite a substantial part of the actual research in psych. Because I think there's some things we can't do as researchers in terms of an experiment. So there are ethical guidelines, which we'll talk towards the end of this unit. We'll go over what are the ethical guidelines. But think about, like, if I'm interested in studying the impacts of illicit drug use on a fetus, I can't give a pregnant woman meth and say it's for science. Like, that's wildly unethical. So I can't do an experiment. But there are, unfortunately, pregnant women in the world that are using drugs. So I could find those women and do research on the fetus or on the baby after it's born, and it's come out after the mom has used meth. Right? Can't make them do that, but I can describe and collect data on behavior that's already happening. Same thing, like I can't stress people out in the name of science to see if I can get them to develop a psychological disorder. Like, that's wildly unethical. But I could find people that have clinical disorders and see what kind of stress levels they were under as those disorders developed, and then try to draw a correlation between those things. I can describe. When we say hands off, that means we're not manipulating variables, we're not doing things to our subjects, we are just describing, asking questions, and collecting data. Hands off is descriptive research. Okay, so just to reiterate, we are observing and recording, right? We want to do something about children and violence. We can't go beat kids up or have kids beat each other up in the name of science. That's unethical. But we can observe bullying and find out, like, what makes a bully, or what impact does bullying have on kids later in life. Okay, so 3 basic types of descriptive research. Number 1 is the case study, where we look at one person or situation, or maybe even kind of homogeneous group of people, and observe them in depth. Usually you see this with kind of very unique cases, like the one that everybody is obviously obsessed with because you see the shows on Netflix and Amazon, are like serial killers. That would be a case study into, like, what drove this person to do this, what's going through their mind as they're committing these heinous crimes, right? Or we'll see in a second people that have suffered very strange and unique or rare types of traumatic brain injury or disease. Like, those would be case studies. Okay, we can't give somebody a traumatic brain injury and then study them, but someone that's had an accident or developed a disease, we can then describe and go in depth with a case study what's happened to this person. So here's an example of that. Psychology's most famous case study, and he is on the AP exam pretty much every year. His name is Phineas Gage. You might have heard of him before. He's kind of famous in pop science. But he took a railroad spike to the face. Dynamite went off, and he was looking down the hole, and the railroad spike shot through his head. He maintained consciousness, which is wild. Not only did he survive, he stayed conscious through the whole thing. You see here, it kind of shot through his left cheekbone, behind his eye socket, and then out his frontal lobe. So scientists were really intrigued about not only how did he survive, but there were some serious personality defects after his accident. Beforehand, he was supposedly like the nicest guy, and then afterwards he developed like drug and alcohol problems, anger issues, like all these different things. So this would be a case study into this one specific, unique subject, Phineas Gage. You can't go around and do experimental research on this kind of traumatic brain injury because you can't legally shoot railroad spikes through people's heads. But you can, hands off, do a descriptive case study. Okay? The second type of descriptive research is a survey method. Everyone knows what a survey is. Everyone's taken a million surveys. All you're doing is just asking people to self-report their opinions, right? What's your favorite pizza topping? Or how do you feel about homework? Or whatever it is, right? You've all taken surveys. You can even count in like reviews of products that you buy online. All that. Those are surveys. Okay, we're not placing people in any types of situations and forcing them to buy things or do things or answer a certain way. All you're doing is asking their opinion and then gathering that data. A couple keys here with survey. You want to make sure that you have a good sample that's representative of the group that you're trying to gather information from. So if I wanted to get like the opinion of high school students, if I only asked my students who are AP students, that's probably going to be a biased sample because AP students don't really represent the broader population. Okay, so survey, your sampling is very important. We'll talk more about that too. A couple other things that are important in the survey is how you word surveys. You'll see like leading surveys. This one is particularly bad over here, this Trump Pence, which I'm sure it's made by some other, it's not sanctioned by Trump. I would hope not. But you can see like, who would you rather see fix our nation's shattered immigration policies? So first of all, it's a leading question because it's implying that immigration policies are shattered. And then second, you see your two options are President Trump or an MS-13 loving Democrat. Okay, so obviously you're going to get some skewed results there and meaningless results. And then also, you want to, like we said a second ago, who was surveyed? Does your sample represent the population? We'll talk more about random sampling too. So random sample, I would pause it here. This is definitely something you're going to want in your notes and something that comes up on the AP exam and something we just need to know as a participant in a science class. A random sample is when each individual in a population has an equal chance of being chosen for the research. Some of the bad things about a survey or the drawbacks, and you'll see this on that initial chart too, is people could not respond. Sometimes you need to add an incentive to get people to respond, like money, obviously. People can lie or misrepresent themselves. They might want to tell you what they think you want to hear. It might be embarrassing information you're asking about that they're not willing to share. There's a whole slew of reasons why people would lie on a survey. Sometimes there's surveys on websites you want to look at, like some news outlets. They make you take a survey before you can read an article. So you just click as fast as you can, not even reading the questions. So how bad is that data? Really bad. Okay. And then we can use surveys also in the experimental method as a way to measure our dependent variable. All right, and then the last one here, naturalistic observation. Kind of creepy maybe. It's when you're observing behavior in its natural state. No control or interaction, and we'll talk about something later in the unit called the Hawthorne effect, whereas subjects, if they know they're being watched, will act differently. So naturalistic observation, you'll see this, and we'll see this in a few examples in this class, where you have a two-sided mirror. So you've got researchers on one side of the mirror, and you've got, let's say, children interacting in a room, and us as researchers are observing that behavior. The kids can't see through the mirror, so they are going to act quote-unquote normally. Okay? And here's the Hawthorne effect we talked about a second ago. So for ethical reasons, people need to know that they're involved in a study. You can't just like go out and start watching people and use that as your subjects. So when they know they're involved in a study, they act differently, and this is something called the Hawthorne effect. We'll talk more about that throughout the course of the year as well. So there's your three different types of descriptive research. We talked about surveys, case studies, and naturalistic observations. A little quick description of each. Make sure you know the drawbacks and the benefits of each, and that these are hands-off types of research, which means we are not controlling or manipulating variables at all. We are just simply asking, watching, collecting data over concerning what people are already doing.